Good afternoon, folks, and welcome into the Takeup today. We have a fairly simple, light episode today, as I know lots of you are preparing for the Easter holiday. If you are not already off on holiday, you are probably working hard and trying to fulfill the last orders that you can get out the door before the holiday hits. And for those of you who are just tuning in, having some fun, I hope you get something out of this educational. I hope this is something that will be useful to you. I've been asked repeatedly to do more of the design run throughs. So, in essence, wherein I take a design, show you that design in software, pull the thing apart, talk to you about why I did what I did, replay that design, and explain kind of how it was put together. And so, for today, as shown in the but not so much for direct work on, let's say, vestments or anything like that. Not nearly as much as I probably would have liked. Not that I'm a religious person myself. Frankly, I may name things incorrectly or say things incorrectly because I don't know enough to tell you the difference. The truth of the matter is, when it comes down to the artistic sense of the thing, that was not necessarily what they were worried about. They were not looking for someone who is next to them in the pew so much as someone who could make the design work. Truth of the matter is, though, a lot of the religious garments and vestments are very beautiful pieces of embroidery, and throughout history, it's been a place where embroidery has been used to its best effect. So, love to show you some of the stuff that I've done. I will explain some of the things about the clients I've worked for, and also we're just going to talk about some other designs, like as shown in the thumbnail, the little bunny design that I did that I gave away from Brilliance recently. It's just a very simple sketch design. I'll probably run you through that just to once again discuss the nature of sketch designs. I have a lovely little Easter egg design that I drew many years ago that I'm refreshing again and brought into Brilliance so I could reinvent it a little bit and show once again the text envelopes that I've shown pretty recently. And then we will go over those religious designs. I have three really large, ornate coats of arms that were papal coats of arms. So a coat of arms made for the Pope. So we've got three of those, three different popes, and we'll kind of look at those. And honestly, they are very similar to each other, though there's some stuff that I'm sure some of the dyed in the wool folks will notice is not properly set up for each of those in an artistic way. And I'll explain that in a minute. And then some other pieces that are just related, and I'll tell you the story about how I got those done. But I expect this to be a short show today, probably not hours of content, more like 30 minutes to an hour of content. And we'll just go ahead and watch those things replay. I'll talk about the designs. I'll show you some pictures and we'll just discuss. So, low stress, maybe a little low engagement today, but if there's anything you want to ask about those designs, if there's anything you want to ask about what you see on screen as I'm working, or if you have any other related questions while we're going through this, by all means, hit me up in the comments and we'll talk. But you'll be seeing me replay these often in Stitch Artist or in Brilliance. Most of these were created previously. You guys know that previous to this, I worked in several softwares, starting out in QDT, then in Melco Design Shop, then in Wilcom, and then Wilcom and Pulse, Wilcom and something else usually, and then going on to Stitch Artist and working through that. So now you're going to see them replayed there. So you may not see all the objects for all of them. I'm going to stay in Stitch Artist so I can keep everything in one window, but we will still talk about the way that things were drawn and set up and densities and all the rest as we're going. But suffice it to say, some of them have been recreated, some of them have not. So some things I'll be playing back from Stitch files. Suffice it to say, hopefully be something interesting. And if nothing else, I know if you're like me and when you start to want to relax, you will turn on something like a furniture restoration video. I hate to admit this. I've become a man of that age who watches furniture restoration videos, but he's trying to chill out. You may just like watching these replay and listening to me talk about the process. But if nothing else, good to tear down some designs, do some design analysis, and we'll talk about, of course, the top kind of comments I always make about design analysis, which are what can we see immediately upon looking at a design or an embroidered sample? What are the things that we can discern when we're just looking at embroidery that might be interesting to us replicating those styles or being inspired by the style of the piece we're working on? If we are so lucky as to have the digital file, whether that's a Stitch file or the actual native file, what can we conclude from the replay watching it run? So what do we know about how it was sequenced, put together, layered? What does that tell us about this design, and how can we then use those cues when we're working through what we've seen and what is interesting about stitch types, design, angle, layering, interactions between stitch blocks, to get those techniques into our own work. What are the things that we might be able to pull from that and put into our own work? So we'll talk about that as we're going on today. But like I said, low stress. We're just going to watch some stuff, talk about some stuff, see some designs run, and talk about a little about the stories behind them and how they came to be. So let's go ahead and talk to the folks who are here live. If you are in the hashtag replay squad, go ahead and comment. We love to have you here. But if you need to go ahead and fast forward, go ahead. We're going to talk to folks who are live because I like to foster community and engagement here. So first and foremost, we've got Barb coming in from Minnesota Custom Made. Hi, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone from North Central Minnesota. Happy to have you in. Got Doug in saying hi. We have Gail in from Alberta, Canada. Thank you from our neighbors to the north there. We've got Jeffrey showing up saying hello, everyone. Glad to see you here. We've got Frank. By the way, thank you, Frank, for tuning in and asking me what's going on. We've been having some problems with my posting schedule working out right and disseminating across the different channels. Thank you for checking in. So Frank from over in the UK, thank you for showing up. We got DJ Kev showing up. Love to see you here. Hello, everyone from sunny North Carolina. Absolutely. Representing North Carolina. Love it. We have Kingsbury Crafts coming in. We've got, let's see, everybody talking to each other, which I love. So it looks like we're all just chatting, which, hey, keep it up. Chat in the comments. That's what they're here for. Love to see you guys having a community centered around what we're doing here. And we have a creator of Embroidering software. So the man, the myth, the legend, Brian Bailey, coming in from Arizona. He, like me, on an early morning today. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And so, like I said, guys, you're going to see some things. And part of that will be the Easter design stuff. Part of that will be the religious design stuff. But we're going to replay all of those. And I'll show you some stuff, including, like I said, some revamps as I rebuilt one of my Easter designs in Stitch Artist recently. That's a design that people liked, one that I drew myself. And the latest giveaway from Brilliance, that the rabbit sketch design. I'm going to go through that briefly too. So you're going to see lots of these things. And also I will go ahead and provide you guys with links when they are relevant. And in fact, I think I'll do that right now. So before we start anything else, I'm going to go ahead and grab the screen share over here and just say, first design probably we'll go through is just this little simple guy. So Vintage Sketch Easter Rabbit design, who is currently free right now over at Embroidering. And you see me copying that link. That's because you are about to get the link yourself out in the chat right now if you want it. You can grab that over at embrilliance.com. If you don't have that coming up in your comments, if you're not seeing the comments, go ahead and grab it over at embrilliance.com. You'll see it in the projects blog. And if you're ever wondering about the projects blog, where that is, you'll see new projects pop up in this little rotator here in the middle of the design set. You see these three little chips. Those are the latest designs. And you will see the projects over here in the left-hand link bar. That's how we have them currently. And right now, if you want to, you can grab the Vintage Easter Bunny design. It is in a BE file, a native file from Brilliance, but you can use our free express version, which is described at the bottom here. It tells you how to get it and how to open it up. You can grab that free version of our software to open it up and then save it into any machine file you want. So DEST, PES, EXP, whatever you're looking for, we can output that for you for free. But that is the first design we're probably going to go over, though I do want to let you know we have quite a few others, including, like I said, the Easter egg design and these ornate papal designs. And I will discuss a little bit about this, the statuary that we have down here in the corner in a minute in relation to this series of designs that were all done for one single customer. All of the papal banners, as you're seeing here, and the pieces, the chasubles that were done for this statuary. So we're going to have some fun stuff to talk about, but I think we're going to start it easy and breezy with our friend here, the rabbit. So I used to say, maybe not the most detailed design ever, but it is something that I think is worthwhile replaying and checking out. So let's go ahead and jump to that. I think it's worthwhile, like I said, to just keep in mind those questions once again for design analysis. If you are looking at somebody else's embroidery design, if you are looking at a piece of embroidery, what can we see immediately? What can we conclude from the replay if we have the design and we can replay it in our software, if we can do that slow replay, that film strip replay? And then how do we use those techniques in our own work? So we're going to go through the Stitch Simulator and watch some of these work. But yeah, think about these things as we start to look. Love to have you guys here and along for the ride while we're doing it. All right. So, first and foremost, let's go ahead and grab our friend, the bunny, up here and have a look at him for right now. So this is our friend the bunny, right? This is the size that we're running at. This is about 56 millimeters, 57 millimeters high. So we've got a little over a couple inches high. Very small piece, meant to be on things like napkins and very simple designs, right? So this is a running stitch design. It's incredibly simple. However, there are some things about it that are interesting, and it's something you can see. First and foremost, look at this piece. I keep saying that. Look at the piece as a piece of embroidery. We're saying, what can we see without analyzing anything else? First thing I'll have you notice is, despite the fact that we don't have extreme variances in thickness, and in fact, they're very evenly thick around, very much like something that would be done pen and ink style illustration or engraving style illustration, we see fairly simple lines. However, we do see some texture. If you kind of look at the back of this design, we kind of look across the back around the tail, we see some texture and we see some variation in the generation of the stitches, and we're seeing some areas that look a little thicker. Though the first thing I'm going to tell you is, once we get to the replay, you'll notice that there are only 2 passes over any given line in this design. So how are we getting the extra thickness on that design? How are we getting some of the roughness and fuzziness, despite the fact that we just have a double running stitch? Now, not done with the double running stitch tool. That's the trick. So though we have 2 running stitches around any given line on this piece, the interesting thing to look at is that I've offset the entry points on purpose to create what is almost like, if you're familiar with like freestanding lace, there's something called a wickle stitch or a wiggle stitch, where you'll see one line of stitching, and then across that line of stitching, the second line that follows it goes back and forth over on either side. The penetration points locked down on either side of the initial line of stitching. That wiggle stitch style, that wickle stitch style, is something that I often use in order to create designs like this. And I do have a couple questions, so we'll talk about that. We've got Gail asking a question here, so let's bring this up. Gail says, how many trims are in this design? 0. That is 1 filament of thread and consequently 1 filament of bobbin, since it's interlock sewing. There are no trims in this design. Everything is absolutely connected and it runs from one end to the other. That is how I like to do detailed designs. Now, admittedly, this is actually much less detailed than some of the others I've done, and I may try and bring up some of the other recent designs I've done. The turkey design is one that I did in the same style. In fact, that's where this comes from, is there lots of folks liked the woodcut turkey design. I'll actually open that right up here. The woodcut turkey design that I did for Embroidering earlier, much more detailed piece, still no trims. I generally tend to do things with no trims if at all possible, and especially when we're at these really small sizes, a couple of inches in height. I am not trying to have any trims in that if at all possible. And so generally I will plot things so they do not have trims. This is that woodcut turkey. It started off a series where I did this turkey design. I did a maze design. I did several pieces at the same time. And I'll go ahead and grab one of those up as well while I'm here. This is the maze design that also went with this. You can see the original engraving and the maze design. These were kind of a whole series of holiday styled designs in order to kind of have that set of, I'd say, what was it? We were doing kind of like a set of napkin designs. People wanted to have the entire set. So that kind of got interesting, but suffice it to say, the vintage Easter rabbit sketch is very similar and kind of in the same vein as these. But let's go ahead and look at the actual design. I mean, originally, you can see the design here. There it is in stitches. It is also on a heavy canvas. And the other thing I'm going to tell you about this, folks, and this is not something I'm going to say you do frequently or maybe even at all generally, this is done with no stabilizer. On a piece of canvas of this weight, with no stretch on it, with this little stitching on it, I slapped this together in the hoop and I did not stabilize it whatsoever. There's just not enough distortion that's going to happen in a straight stitch design this small with like 1,200 stitches in it that's going to cause that kind of trouble. It's lovely for certain things. Napkins you might need to stabilize, but you might also be able to get away with a removable or a washable stabilizer. And even on a nice even weave napkin, have something it'll be a little looser. The stitches will ride a little looser if you don't have the tension just so after you wash something out. But on a piece like this, I actually had it on fairly heavy canvas bags when I decided to put this on as a little design element. I ran this with no stabilizer, which is not something I would usually do. But honestly, the material stable and the amount of design work I'm doing on it, the amount of embroidery and thread that's going through this thing is just not going to disrupt it enough to make a difference. Um, like I said, it really is contingent. All these things that we're trying to do with the variables and the way that we stitch are contingent upon the fabric and the design and the disruption you're going to do. So distortion is not one and done. We learn distortion for all materials. It is every material is a little different. Every design causes that stretch and distortion differently. And in this case, yeah, stabilization was not necessary. But the reason I kind of did this design, not only just because we wanted to have something to give away for Easter, but because I wanted to have something that I could kind of add to that series of holiday designs in the woodcut style. And then upon looking at them, I found kind of an orphan piece of art. And the thing was, this piece of art that I was working from, unfortunately, I could not find the original source. I knew the general era of the source is from an old school, like Victorian painting book, but the original art, I could not find the original source that went with it. And so the book that it came from, I can't tell you. Usually I do try and check that out. In this case, I don't have it. The other thing I do want to mention, though, and I kind of would like to make sure we cover just a little bit, is that this particular piece, when I worked on the art, not only are you going to see that I offset stitches to make them thicker, I want you to notice you can see the original art kind of peeking out, and I have the original image still outlaid in the blog post here, and you'll see that oftentimes I'm skipping pieces of the design, right? I am not always trying to pull in these elements. I'm usually allowing some portion of it to fall away, because when we're really small, when we have uh, tiny embroideries, we really don't have the room. If we throw in every single line that's there, you'll see that I dodged lines that were in the legs. I dodged out some lines in between this shading. You'll see a zigzag down here in the bottom right by the tail, whereas there were multiple lines in the original art. If I had added every single line, I would have created a satin stitch, even though I was using draw with points and using a run stitch tool. What would have come from it is a satin stitch, because I would have closed the density of the stitches, even the detail stitches I'm drawing with the straight stitch tool, so tightly that they just black out. They cover the background behind them, and full coverage means it's a fill or it's a satin stitch. It's no longer detailed lines. And as you can see, it was a good call. If I had gotten any tighter on any of the lines in the chest here, it would have locked together and looked more like a satin stitch. It would not have retained the look that the original had, even though you can see that there are multiple lines and jagged edges and details that I left out. The other thing to notice, if we look at the original art versus the design itself, you can see it sitting on top there. You see those lines inside of the eye are a lot closer together. Well, I opened up the eye to let it remain further open in the final design. If you smash it down, the smaller you make an eye, the more likely you are to make it close up. And I thought the little detail of the smiling look to the eye looked a lot nicer when it was larger. So I will often, on a small design, open the eye up a little bit. In this one, I probably didn't need to open up as much as I did, but I just made an artistic choice and said, you know what, if I closed in too much tighter, especially in the back edge of the eye here, we're going to fully fill in the area of that eye. So one of the things we do when we're interpreting for embroidery, and yes, I said interpreting, we need to make sure as we digitize to think about the actual material we're using, the thickness of the thread, how small we are going in the design, and understand that we are making interpretive choices that will lend to the look. And here's the thing, sometimes it's just a choice you decide on. There's loose lines inside of the little jar that he's carrying. And by the way, funny enough, everybody kind of looks at this and says, oh, he's carrying an Easter basket. When I found this little art piece, I have to admit, it may not be an Easter rabbit. It was listed as an Easter rabbit, but I don't think it necessarily is, because truthfully, he's carrying what is actually a little net and a jar. I think this dude's hunting for fireflies. I don't know. That's my guess. It was from a kid's painting book. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the original in its full splendor, but in the scans that were provided from the person who was kind of scavenging public domain art, they gave me this scan, and I just really liked the position of the guy. I loved him carrying the little net, and for me, this style just kind of spoke to me. I do like these for vintage, especially sketch style designs. But let's go ahead and run through it quickly. I'm not going to belabor this too much. But here is the rabbit as he is, and in one big piece here. And we can see all these run stitches kind of broken apart as they are now. But I had originally had some issues with the way this thing was running. This piece, I did stop and start, but I did eventually fuse these all together. So when we were originally running this guy, I went ahead and had a couple places where I stopped working because I was doing this in between a bunch of other stuff. So you'll see that these are individual blocks. But if you are in Stitch Artist, this is what I did to the eventual piece. If you have lines like this, you can connect outlines and run them together, and you can then repurpose those, make sure they have, if they are all the same stitch type, which in this case, these were all the stitch type and size, I went ahead and grabbed those and made them all into one run object. So that's another thing to notice is you can indeed, when you need to, you can take disparate elements that have stopped and started, or if you accidentally stop, just start right from where you were and you can connect them down the road. But to see how this piece actually runs, let's go ahead and run through the preview, and this should be very simple to follow. You're going to see that I start here under the arm. I tend to have my start and stop points in a somewhere in a tight spot where if there's a little bit of darkness from the tie in, tie off, it's not going to bother the design at all. And it's not somewhere in a focal point. So I wouldn't be trying to start and stop in the nose. I wouldn't be starting and stopping on the end of this pole or somewhere would be noticeable. I probably should have started and stopped in the crook of the tail. I think that would have been a better choice, actually, now that I talk about it. But at the same time, not a bad piece at all. And like I said, starting and stopping here makes any knot a little less obtrusive. But let's go ahead and first, let me try and grab the right thing. Let me be on the right screen here. You'll see my cursor now over this as we kind of replay it. And I'm going to control the replay. First, you'll see I go inside the paw and back out. We define the jar. And you'll see that I take these trips inside, right? So anytime I hit a line or a junction, I can drop into and then back out of that line or junction and then continue touring around. So there's the jar. We start to go into the details inside the body. And then I tour back out to the outside edge. And that you'll see me doing that several times where we kind of tour into the details and then we connect back out to the outside edge. So that's how I tend to do it, is to think in these tours. So as you hit an intersection, you tour in if it connects nicely, and then you back out to the outside edge. So in here, we start to define the bow that he's wearing. Go back around that outside edge again. So the outside edge is only currently getting a single thickness of the line. There's that upper foot there to the end of the pole into the detailing on the net. Around the net, we've done tours for all the details that are inside of that. Then we're off to the back of the head. Tours inside for the details in the ears. Then we go and do the eye, separate that out. We tour in for the shading in the mouth and all of the whiskers. And then as we get back around, you'll see I kind of finish up the pole and then we finish the inside detail on the arm. And now we're back at that original point. I'm now going to tour back around the design, around that outside edge. And you'll see I had a place where I missed a little piece of detail inside internally. No big deal. As we tour back around the outside edge, we drop a little tour in and back out to deal with that little line of detail that I missed. So the other thing to realize is if you're doing a piece like this, if you bypass one of the little pieces, either you can stop and go back and fix it and reinsert it between two pieces of design, or you can just go back on the second tour if it doesn't bother it so much. Designs like this that are very light and have these straight stitch outlines, it really isn't so critical. It's really not so bad to deal with it in that way. So like I said, it's not a big deal to necessarily tour back in and end up having to add to it. We have a couple people who have made some comments here, so I'm just going to grab some comments before we zoom in on some of this stuff and I show you some of the other features that are interesting to see. Gail says, although it's thin, it's very detailed. Thank you. It's a little detailed piece. I've done many, much more detailed pieces, but I thought this one was great. Number one, the other thing that this was supposed to fill is the need for people who don't have time to stitch, who want to throw together one little fun Easter thing to give away. This sucker is, on the slowest setting on any machine, you've probably got a few minutes into it. So it's not a long running piece. So it's very simple. Jeff says defines the eye. Jeffrey, yeah, absolutely. You just kind of want to define the outside edge of the eye and you want to leave out as much as you can. Honestly, you don't want to add more to it. Great piece to practice a running stitch. Yeah, absolutely. This kind of work, these really simple engraving pieces, old school, like book engravings, woodcuts are fantastic for running stitch practice. Also realize I did not add every detail. So sometimes people are like, oh, there's some of these details floating in here. They don't connect to anything and I don't want to jump and trim. As long as it doesn't really destroy the entire piece, leave pieces out. That is fine. Lisa Shaw, my other compatriot over at Brilliance. Good afternoon. Checking in for today's digitizing discussion. Thank you. Hopefully there's something good for you, but I know you know this stuff. Happy Friday to all, says Joanne. Digitizing is such art. She says, I'm a big fan of sketchy designs. Yeah, me too. I do love those. Doug says you could rubber band it to make the edit. Yeah, you totally could. You could jump in and break that out and make the edit if you wanted to, but not necessarily problematic. Um, and then Lisa says, "I'm sorry I missed that." As you tour around the outside edge again, I'm assuming you created the outline again. It is not a double run. Absolutely not a double run. No, and in fact, that's the next thing that I want to kind of clear up on this piece. Why do we have, and I'll go back to the original once again for you. Why do we have a little bit of extra thickness in the back here and a little roughness around these lines? Also, how am I getting very curved looking edges when I have very small straight stitches? And it's all about offsetting your second run. And it's something I've talked about before, but I think it's worth taking a look at. When we zoom in on this piece, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in tight, what you're going to notice is very, very intentionally, I have offset the control points. So when we're looking at this piece here, we are offsetting the points from one run to the next. So here, and I'll go ahead and kind of turn on my full photorealistic view here so you can see it better. As we get close to a corner, we'll see that the first run, and I can actually go play this back, the first run will look very jagged. So see how this looks very polygonal. We have corners here. So these corners along this hoop do not look very round. Well, when I come back around for the second run, and you'll see it really far along this the preview here, now you see how it is a lot more round looking. That's because I have offset the control points. On the second time that I went through and digitized the edge, I very specifically offset the control points. So perfection in this case actually doesn't do you any favors. What we want to see is on that second run, we are slightly offsetting all these control points so that when the two runs overlap, we actually end up with a rounded look. And in fact, in areas where I wanted to have extra thickness or roughness, you're going to see that I've done that wiggle stitch I talked about earlier, so that I actually have two fairly different paths. We have a fairly straight path here, and then I have done shorter wiggling or wickle stitch type stitching across the original piece. So I went back across, and in the second run, in various areas, I have offset the points very intentionally to thicken and to round out what would be the more jagged polygonal look to some of the corners. And you can see it in the basket here too, rounded out so that it looks more round and rough on the outside edge. Whereas if I had just copied the original line and then pasted it on top of itself and ran it the other direction, or just continued around the edge with a double stitch or used a double stitch type instead, you would get the additional thickness. But what you wouldn't get is that roundness and that organic look to the line that you get from doing this kind of rounding procedure, where every time you have a corner, you then go ahead and add the next round across it, and you offset them slightly so that the kind of sum of both of these in your eye rounds that edge off, makes it look a little more organic than it would if you just copied and pasted on top of itself. And I mean, this is also, you'll see that I'm using a lot of hard control points here, so regular corner points. In this case, at this size, I'm not expecting to do a ton of resizing because this is a straight stitch or running stitch design. The other thing you're going to say about that is I want to control where the needle drops. I'm not intending for this to generate a new clean curve every time. So instead of using round points or using continuous curve points or using cusp points, I'm using corner points through the entire thing and controlling where they drop the stitches. Admittedly, I'm not just dropping manual stitches because I do have long lines where I don't need additional control points, and I'm fine for those to have a regular stitch type where it's just one length of stitches on it. But when we get into things like these corners where I'm trying to round them out, I do want to control where those drop, and so I'm using, so in those corner points, I am using those hard node or control points to make that happen. So yeah, you'll see that in those corners, in those edges, I am indeed using those corner points to drop those and to control where those offsetting points are. So yeah, very small curves. It is for me the way to handle that. And honestly, you can see that even if I were to jump over here and very simply kind of show it to you, when you are stuck on really small measurements trying to approximate a curve, it's like you, even when you think about it in a curve style, you could draw a curve, but we know because this is going to be a straight stitch, once I have running stitches in there, what's that curve going to be? It's going to be a series of straight lines anyway. So if I am drawing a curve myself, instead of using those curve points, or even if I use the curve points, let's say I use the curve points on the first round of stitching over it, when I come back to that round of stitching, if I'm actually previewing the stitches and seeing what's there, you can see this and say, all right, if I were to go back and draw points back around this piece, and I wanted to, digitize something that was going to look more like the original stitching, I would probably say, hey, I want to see that in stitches, and I'll draw across that, in that same fashion where I would kind of offset those lines. So if I were working from that, see, the curve actually kind of makes it harder for me to see what I'm doing. So when I'm working on a very small curve, and I'm just going to approximate a curve with these 3 stitches here, then when I come back, I'm just going to want to offset those a little bit. And then when we zoom back out, if I make that into, once again, we'll make those into running stitches up here. When I back out from them, you'll see that it approximates a curve much more nicely than if I had just said, all right, I'm going to do that same kind of curve and I'm just going to double it up. And in fact, I'll show that to you. Same very small curve. We outlay that. If we go ahead and make the same stitch length there, we have those 3 here. If I go over here and say I want a doubled stitch curve, well, it is 2 rounds of stitching, which I can show you by replaying it. But the penetration points are exactly in the same spot on the way back, meaning that though it will still round out and soften a little bit from the thickness of the thread, it will not have the kind of offset that creates that additional roundness. Or if you offset it in space as well, which you can see me kind of offsetting some areas where I have larger gaps in here, I'm allowing some shadow to fill in. It also makes the lines look thicker, as you can see here. So interesting stuff, right? There's some stuff that's interesting for that. So getting a more rounded look and offsetting it just looks a little bit nicer for very small curves. So thank you, Gail, who says, love how you do those small curves. Yeah, it's something I learned really early on. And honestly, I do it on very small straight stitch lettering too. Sometimes you'll have a letter O and it looks very much like you have like a hexagon for a letter O. You can offset your points and it rounds it out. So when you're in that sub, like that 3 millimeter little bitty lettering that you're doing, if you're still in 40 weight thread, you can get a more rounded look on your O's and S's and R's and stuff too. And Lisa says, what an awesome technique to share on how to get a more rounded look, controlling the stitches, inserting the evil laugh. Yeah, I know I do a lot of minor detail stuff, folks, but there's a method to my madness. There's a reason why I do that stuff. All right. So with that, I think what I'm actually going to do is we'll go off to the religious stuff for a second, and then we'll pop back over to the Easter design, because I will kind of show you what I'm talking about. The other couple of designs, we have these, the religious designs, the big coats of arms. And then of course we have this one, the Happy Easter kind of egg design that I drew years ago. Which I'll talk about briefly, and then set that up for you guys again and show it to you. But I think it'd be interesting for us to talk about the papal banners and how those came about. If you've been around my classes, you've probably heard this story before, but I will talk about what happened and why I was doing these big giant papal banners and how that turned out. So in order to talk about that, I'll just go ahead and start right here. If we're looking at this piece here, what you've got is on the left-hand side is the original art that I was handed. So the fellow who wanted these done came in and asked, he's like, nobody else in town wants to do these things. I want a big banner done. I want it embroidered. And everybody's trying to give him print. He was not interested in print. And it turns out this fellow is a very, very religious person, and in his home has his own chapel. Right. So he's got his own chapel. but he's a Catholic fellow. I believe he was from Santa Fe. He had his own chapel in his home and his own kind of devotional space in his home, and he wanted to have the coats of arms of the last three popes. He wanted the papal coats of arms done for him so he could have those. And he also wanted some religious gear for a statue of the Virgin Mary. So he had he had some chasubles. And the only thing you need to know is there's like a device that you wear over your shoulders where there's these designs at the end, the chasuble. And I'll show that to you in a moment. So he had both. Originally, he had this thing that I'm going to show you, this banner. And then he kept coming back to me for more banners and more banners. And eventually he also had me do those chasubles, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And they're interesting for a couple different reasons. First, I'm just going to talk briefly about the banners, and we'll replay those. And then I will talk to you about the chasubles, because the chasubles actually came in two sizes. There was one large piece and then two very small pieces with the same fairly simple design. But I made very different decisions about how to execute those based on the scale. And I think that's something that might be of help to us. So we'll talk about that more. Once again, keep in mind all these questions about what we can see, what we notice, and what we can use for ourselves, and what the replay shows us as far as things like layering and such, which is going to be more interesting as we do these more detailed designs. But with that in hand, let's go ahead and talk about a couple of these pieces and what they mean and how they turned around. But first, I do have a question that is about the last design, so I'll go ahead and do that really quickly. Joanne says, can you address the stitch speed for those straight stitch style designs with single or double run quilt designs recommended by a particular machine manufacturer stitch slow? I am going to be fully honest with you and say that I didn't adjust anything for this the stitch speed. I went at the speed the current machine I was using was running. Now, it wasn't running 1200. It's running less than that, but I didn't worry too much about it. Small design like that, if I were doing a ton of that work and I was noticing that I was getting looping or tension issues or something else, that would be fine. On a flat piece of fabric with very little distortion, on a design that's got that few stitches, I went ahead and kind of let it run. And I think I was running at like 800, 900, somewhere in there, but nothing crazy, nothing, I'm not on like the newest ZSK machine running 2000 either. But honestly, as long as the slow stitch was catching up the beginning of the design and it was running nicely with tension, which this one was, I didn't really worry too much. But let's go ahead and talk about the customer really quickly, and this next kind of piece. We'll talk about this story of the of this fellow and what he wanted and how he had me to do this stuff. And actually, Lisa has a comment, so I'll go ahead and bring this up. She says, this is a great example of a customer that knows what they want and willing to pay for what's important to them. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, what I'm going to tell you about this is by the time this was all done, he was paying hundreds of dollars per each piece, because I was doing art and design and digitizing, and we were doing single runoff pieces for him. And he wanted them sampled before running on final material. So these were hundreds of dollars worth of work. And the other thing I'm going to show you is he was very happy with that price. We continued to bring that price to him, and it turned out down the road that we didn't have to do nearly so much as you might think to create the other two banners, because he wanted a matching frame on this banner. So as we can see, the first thing I'm going to tell you about that's funny, the image on the left that he brought to me, this is massively cleaned up and scaled. The original image that he brought me, and this is going to be a little telling of my age as well as of this fellow. There was already digital, cameras everywhere in the world. However, the thing is, this guy brought me a print, and I joke you not, he brought me a small print from a camera. It was regular film. And though this looks pretty square in the design that you guys are looking at, he was looking up at a banner hanging off of a rail at the Vatican. So this original picture that he brought me was skewed. It had perspective distortion. And this detail that you're seeing is about as much detail as I had. So what I did with that design is I asked him, I said, hey, can I then draw this and we'll have you kind of evaluate it? I went in, and this on the right-hand side, that is my vector. I drew that myself. So looking at the design that was there, I intuited as much as I could. I figured out what might be there. My knowledge of how kind of a canthus design is shaped, a little bit of knowledge of coats of arms, as well as just time digitizing. Over time with digitizing, you can look at the digital slop that comes even from scanning film. Now, luckily, scanning film, it was fuzzy, but not aliased. So it's not like a JPEG. It wasn't dots of color everywhere. It was fuzzy, not alias. So I could get more out of it because a film camera pick is going to be better than a digital pick for that particular problem. But I did have to work from the print, not from the negative. Suffice it to say, I drew my own piece. Drew this piece, I believe, in Corel Draw, though I eventually went to SVG to move it around because we had to use it in a bunch of different software down the road for other projects. But I did draw this piece myself in vector in a modular way. You'll see that despite color differences, the actual shapes on the left and right hand side are symmetrical. So it means that I could copy and paste quite a lot. And so that's the vector on the right hand side. And in the center is the final piece that I digitized. And you can see that. The reason I have it shown kind of off center in an angle is so that you can see the play of the light over the carved stitches. It's something that I usually kind of talk about when I teach, is this depth that you get. And in fact, that's why I've got this very tight, close shot of the carved satin stitch elements that go into the acanthus work that's done on the shield here. And also this rope, which by the way is not a motif stitch. Those are individual satin stitch elements that are digitized to fit around the curve. So the one thing you'll notice about a lot of my work, especially if I'm being paid fairly highly by folks, which in this case I was, I do a lot of manual parsing of shapes. I break shapes up myself in an artistic way. I don't necessarily use a ton of automation in that way. You won't see so much in the way of stitch types as you will see me breaking shapes up, like the acanthus leaves that are in here, like the quatrefoil that's down here, like the individually carved satin stitches that are in these tassels. I'm drawing each one of those elements. I'm not using a style or a tool or a carving line. What you see here are several satin stitch elements layered on top of each other. And in the end, we ended up, like I said, doing the three of these for the most three recent popes, starting with, and actually four, because we started with the Pope John Paul piece, which you'll see here. And in this case, it has the traditional white coloring here, but eventually, and I don't know what the religious meaning to it is, there is a version in which they used gold at the end for this same coat of arms, and I'm not sure what the religious significance was. If somebody knows and can tell me, please feel free. But this gold version that has a metallic gold for the M and the cross, that was actually done later. So that kind of Marian shield and cross design that he had in there was kind of done later as an update. So we actually did four of these pieces, though this one on the far right hand side, entirely the same design as was done for the original banner that you see here for the original Pope John Paul II banner. The other thing you're going to notice very easily is that the background blue and the white in the cross are both done in a poly twill. So these are appliqued as a poly twill as the basis behind the rest of the design work. The thing I'm also going to tell you about, you'll notice from my work, and I often, even though, like I said, we are blessed, especially in Embrilliance, we're blessed to have a lot of automated tools that do things for you. You will find that I do things like make an applique where I don't have a full bordered edge around it. You will not see a single applique object being used for this cross. You'll see four separate segments because I don't need the end segments to be tacked down the same way when they're going under this gold border. So I have a tendency to either use multiple applique segments, like applique tool in your software segments, to define these and then make sure that my stitches are pointing in the right direction, that I've drawn from the right direction to create the tack stitches the way they should be. Or I will use multiple stitch types or elements and regular satins as cover, and I will digitize my elements manually using the standard, zigzag or column, the placement, the straight stitch, and the satin stitch, and layer them together. Because though the automation is really wonderful for making this easy, in more complicated situations, in multi-cut applique situations, same thing as you'll see with the, I believe it's the Francis element that's here in the center where we have the yellow and the red. You're not going to see a full yellow applique or a yellow border around each of these. The red border that happens for the background element behind this shell is also the border that's going to cap off and cover for these two yellow elements. So trying to use an automated shape for each one of these blocks that both went under the rest of the shield and went around the other sides. I'm not doing that. You're not going to see me just using an SVG outline and then slapping the tool on it. I'm going to draw individual elements that allow me to tack these down individually before we run the cover stitching. And you'll see that just the red cover stitching is going to come up and fill into that center area. You're not going to see a yellow applique finial stitch on this piece. So I do these in multiple segments. Lots of people do the same, but I know people get very confused when they're digitizing. Because there's an applique tool, they expect that they're going to click this red shape and say applique tool and be done. When you have something multi-layered like this, or that goes under borders where you don't want additional satin stitch, you're going to either have to edit that shape or draw your own shape that does not necessarily match the original vector art that you drew. So it's just something to kind of bring up as you see the pieces put together with multi-layer applique. I'm very keen on controlling that, and I will probably break up multiple elements in the software to make that happen. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and jump in and just kind of replay these designs. I don't think there's a ton I'll have to tell you that's all that crazy or hard to understand. It's just more about seeing the flow, seeing the layering for the carved elements, and kind of getting how they're put together. And I think certainly these various pieces have something to teach as far as how that's done. And the other thing I'm going to say is we're not going to worry too much about running that outer border several times, because as you can notice, and I'll jump back out into that 3-up design one more time for you to see it. Truth of the matter is all three of them have the same border, which is not entirely correct. Sometimes these crowns that you're seeing up here, these papal miters that are up on the top, will change shape depending on the Pope. That was not something the customer either was aware of or cared about. He just wanted the coat of arms in the center to change for each one. So the thing I'm also going to tell you is, yes, the entire outer border of this piece for all three of these is the same. He liked it as a matching decorative element anyway. It still does have the chief elements that are there, but I do know that there are certain papal coats of arms that have a different style of miter, but that was something that the customer decided against. But yeah, it is something that you suddenly know a lot more than you think you know about these things when you're done, because you have to learn it. At the same time, you do see there are some other elements. The one thing that is different is over here on the Francis piece, he does have this belt on the bottom that is very different from the finial down here at the bottom of the other two pieces. That did have to be altered and made new for that piece. But everything else, the rest of the acanthus work, everything else that's done there was left as is. And the miters on the top did not change because that belt is so different on the Francis piece. It had to be done differently and digitized differently. Like I said, we'll just go ahead and walk through these and take a look at them and see how they're put together. I think it's at least worthwhile to kind of look at how designs are done. If it's something that you haven't done yourself, I think it's worthwhile to take a look at. So let's go ahead and grab the ornate Pope John Paul shield first. We'll see how well I can show it to you. Unfortunately, because it is a very vertical design, I might zoom in on some elements and replay them, but you'll still kind of be able to see how they're put together. So let's go ahead and grab that, and I'll leave myself in the corner here since I think I'll be mostly out of the way. First thing you're going to notice here, and I can go ahead and you'll see that first part, that is just the representation of the applique. They're actually put down in two different stages. I just wanted to be able to see the multi-piece applique without having the preview designs in. So that is just a piece of art that was laid down. We'll go ahead and leave that in there, but just know that in this case, the blue applique is not in 4 pieces. It is in 1 piece, and the white was on top because it was pretty simple, and I didn't think the layering would hurt it. So first thing we're going to notice is all the elements, the placement line, the tack down line, and the edge for that applique. We can let's zoom in on that just a little bit so you can see those. The first thing is just that we're going to go ahead and tack down that initial applique. We tack down the blue, and then we tack down the white, and we cover the white and do the M first, because that's going to tuck in under all of those borders. We want that to be under the edges that are here. So we definitely, like I said, layering as in life is something I teach for depth in embroidery. Yes, I technically could have done that white at a later date, at a later time in the stage, but you'll see I sometimes on very complex pieces will revisit colors so that I can get the layering to look accurately like something is on top of something else. How do we make it look like physical objects? When one physical object is closer to you than the other, it's on top, it's in front of, it obscures the thing behind it. We do that in the sequencing of the embroidery, and it looks more realistic. So let's back off of this again, try and show you the whole thing. In fact, I'm just going to run through the entire design quickly, and then we'll go back and look at some individual elements. First thing is the fill stitch that deals with the major background elements. Then because we're in the same color, we try not to break it up. We have the key. It has a nice curved fill for the gold key. Then we start doing the white bordering. You're also going to notice that I have dropped the white rope in individual segments. Then the gold bordering and the little crown end on the key. We do the other rope segments. We jump over here to do the dark or the silver key, kind of dark gray. Silver edges on that. We have the rope segments over here. Now we start to do the individual satin elements that are in the acanthus work, and we work up to this quatrefoil. We do jump out on that because we do need to jump into each of these tassels. And then we go into the upper border, and you can see that each one of these leaflets works up into the next one. And we'll get closer to these in a minute so you can see more of them. We drop down here, do the other side of the border. All these leaflets up into this central bordered area. Then we cap all of that edge. The white elements in the Papal miter. By the way, once again, curved fill stitches. I love them for showing a little bit of volume, like the volume that's very barrel-like that comes out towards you. Then we have the background elements of the kind of stole that's up there. Then the keys, you're going to notice that the edge of the keys are separate satin elements overlapped so that they have some depth in contrast to the main body of that key. We have our fringes. We keep to the same color after that, so we can go ahead and do the gold key, then this central material, and then at the top we have all of this kind of acanthus work, the borders, the little crown borders that are on the miter, then all the jewels, and final this lunette that's up here, this kind of crescent moon shape. So big project. I did definitely revisit colors a fair amount. To a degree, because we also have a lot of elements that are going to be potentially recolored or moved around. But at this place, I could say I probably could have been a little more efficient with the colors on a big jacket back like this. And this piece isn't huge, but it's a fairly large piece all told. It's like 90,000 stitches. It's a pretty big piece. It is more like a jacket back than it is like a chest or a frontal piece. It is fairly large. This is the kind of thing that I'm going to be more forgiving of breaking it up. Also, because the more we move around to different segments in the same color, we're going to cause stress on that soft, slippery material that this is stitched on. And the more we move from one area and then keep coming back and move these long distances in the hoop, the more likely we're going to have like outlines that don't line up and registration problems. So you see that I also kind of work in sections. You can see that as I'm going through this, I'm working all of the pieces on one side and then all of the pieces on the other side and trying to kind of keep everything together while maintaining minimal color changes as much as I can. I could have probably done a more efficient job of this. But let's zoom in on just a couple of areas and watch them run. Here, we can see this acanthus work up here. I'd really like to kind of just show a little more of that. So let me try and scrub back till we start seeing that acanthus work crawl up that other side. First thing you'll see is that we start from that bottom kind of leaflet, and then we work each leaflet onto it, and then we work the central stem on top of that, making it look continuous with the last leaf. And so we kind of have these 3 leaflets here, then another leaflet on top, and we keep working that around the edge. And as you can see, layering from what's furthest away from us to what's closest to us so that overlapping keeps happening naturally up into that curvature here. So you can see that each one of these is lapped onto the next, and these are individually drawn satin stitch elements. And we can see how that same overlapping here into the key makes things interesting. Let's go ahead and zoom back as well to, I think we'll try and grab that rope, and you can see each one of these rope segments are individual satin stitches. And we can see that again in this curved section, individual satin stitches that we jump into the next satin stitch element as we go across. So yeah, not too much trouble there, but it is something just kind of look at. So that rope texture is done just by satin stitches. So if we look at this piece, the other thing I'm going to also kind of call out, as far as specialized stitch types, the only things that are particularly specialized, we'll see in this element of the tassel and in the quatrefoils here, We have what's called a length limit stitch or an auto split satin stitch, depending on software. In Stitch Artist, you're going to have a length limit stitch. Here, also in these keys that are up at the top, is something very much like that. That's the only specialty kind of thing, and that's done with a very high minimum stitch or edge pad value on those, and a fairly long stitch length value. And so they have a little bit of texture, but it's still very satin-like. Other than that, the rest of this design is absolutely just satin stitches, fill stitches. The only other thing different on the fill stitches is you'll see that on elements where a curve could create some extra depth, like the keys, and especially the Papal miter up here, you're going to see a nice curved fill that's going to create that additional depth and curvature on the piece. So yeah, not much trouble in this laying it out, but it does take a little bit of forethought to make it happen. The other thing we will run through, because people ask me on this, is those tassels. Let's go ahead and see if I can track one of those tassels down. There we are. There's our tassel friend here. The thing you're going to notice is I'm working from the furthest tassels away to the one in the very front and center. So on one side, we have this piece here, and then on the other side, we work up toward that center tassel. Then we overlap, and you also see that I'm, of course, changing the stitch angle so that we get the different play of light over the different angles of the stitches. So yeah, we do go ahead and jump out of that tassel. We work each side separately, and then we change our stitch angle, and we have these overlapping satins up into the top. Let's go ahead and take a look at those pieces again and kind of give you a little bit more of a preview of what those look like. So you can see there's how those little tassels look. Let me see if I can grab one of the singular pieces that might have a little bit more of that detail to share with you. You can see in this piece how those tassels really raise up, and people have always asked me if I've used some sort of 3D material or some sort of 3D stitch in there. No, we do have a fair amount of underlay, but it is just the overlapping of the satins toward the center that causes that to stand up as much as you see it in here. So we will run through the central material on the other dudes too, on our other elements as well. We can run through the centers there. The other things that are interesting to notice, we have these overlapped edges on our crown here that make that have some extra texture. And the one that I also call out is the keys. We will see that the stitch angle is very different from the face of the key here. We have this nice flat fill going into a satin edge here, and then we change the angle into this face just the same way we change the angle on the block, kind of this blocky face of this key, so that it looks much more, it looks like it has a little bit more dimension with the light. And we can see that here where even though we're on the same color of stitches, we have this different play of the light and this dark shadow on the edge between the front of the key block and the side of the key block. So like I said, it's one of those things where you get a little extra texture from it, and the overlapping is the same in these, as I showed you earlier, in the tassels, in the ends of the keys, and in the tassels that are up here. They're very graphical. They're not like realistic tassels, but they are interesting in that the overlapping of the satin stitches creates some dimension, and then the changing of stitch angle creates even more. And the contrast between the texture in the fill stitch and the satin stitch creates some interesting stuff that's going on there. But let's go ahead and zip back up and see if we can see the head of that key come together. So let's get there. We'll see that we have a flat fill, and then we have the front and end of the key boxed in, and then the front of the key. You're also going to see something else interesting, and I'll zoom in on this. I cheat out my way out of trimming pretty frequently. I know that there's going to be a satin stitch element on top of this piece when I finish the key, so I exited this satin stitch in the middle, and then you see these little straight stitches tracking their way across. Well, they're tracking up here and across here. It might not have been very obvious that they were there, but when this design starts to get its detail on it, that cross element is going to cover it, and the final border, we only have a little tiny gap here. When the final borders are all on, what do we see here? That tassel covered it. So I hid my travel stitching. I did manual travel stitching to the next silver element so that I wouldn't have a trim here, even though I wanted this piece to be on top, this top of this key block here. I then used my travel stitches to travel under the cross and up into the next element so that you didn't see those travel stitches and I didn't have to jump and trim. So even though I was only making these as individual pieces, and to be quite honest, I probably didn't need to go to that work for the efficiency. It's just the way my brain works. I travel through stitches, not jumping wherever I can. So we'll go through that briefly. We have a couple different quick questions. So we'll grab those questions and then I'll maybe play through the other ones just for the heck of it, but we won't go through tons of detail on those. You'll just see those real quickly. So Jeffrey says, any issues with needle breaks? Multiple layers are tough sometimes? No, not in these. Also, this is 40 weight thread entirely, 75 and 11 needles entirely, RG point. No, there's only a couple layers here. Then you're going to see that I leave elements out. I leave cut elements if I'm really concerned about getting too dense on something. When I'm worried about being too dense, and you can see it here, I'll try and zip back behind the, if we get the replay going, and you'll see that in the keyway, you see how this keyway has this cut right through it? Why does it have a cut right through it? Because I'm going to have that stacked, overlapped satin right here. And so that gold key has a cut out of it. Why? Because I know that I really am going to have a lot of layers in this area and I don't want that to be there. So I cut away the stitches behind it by not drawing those elements through underneath that area. So yeah, I do watch for that. But at the same time, yeah, not hugely horribly dense, I wouldn't say. Okay, Lisa wants the real goods though. She wants to see my density map. Oh man, I bet you there's some red in there. I bet you there's a little bit of red in there. But let's do it. Why not? I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. I might have some red, but let's see my density map. Oh, I think I might win that one. I think I might have won that one. We'll see. Yeah, there's not a lot of red going on the density map. We have a little elements here, but that's satin on satin. Nothing real bad. So yeah, my density map is fairly blue. The only place you're going to see a lot is elements where all three of these kind of come together, all three layers come together in that area, but not a lot. You're not going to see a tremendous amount of density, but that's also that is years of not wanting to have extra dense designs. So I took the risk. I could have lost, but yeah, for sure. Lisa calling me out with the density map. Come on, man. That'd have been scary. I had to make sure. Anyway, we had a couple other things though, just really quickly, because we had the comments on this, and I thought I was going to go short. I guess I went long, talking too long about everything. But yeah, we'll go ahead with the last couple comments that we have here. Lisa says, even with the bits of reuse, each project has different digitizing as a big project. Yeah, for sure. There's a bit of different digitizing in those elements, but they aren't the same as having done three really different pieces. And Lisa said, sweet. All right, you got me. Hey, at least I came through without knowing ahead of time if I was going to come out. The red has to be there, else you'd have gaps. Yeah, this is true. There are areas where it just has to be multiple overlaps. Plus, what I'm going to say is a little bit of red isn't the end of the world. And if you see where we had that red, one layer of light fill with long satin stitches that are running on top of each other, it just isn't that bad. The only places I can see where there might be a little excess, we've got 3 layers maybe in here. But once again, big loose satin stitches and all the penetration points at the edge don't line up. And that's where you really get those stitch breaks, is where lots of edges are right on top of each other. You have all the penetration points in the same spot. Then you have the worst. Then you really do get the worst of that kind of edge quality problems, or those breakage, honestly, needle breakage and the heavy densities that are difficult. So yeah, it's interesting there. Let's just briefly go through the other ones that we have here, and I'm just going to play them through. There's really not that much to see aside from just kind of observing some of the stitch details that are there. So I'll just go ahead and zip in, and we'll see. The interesting thing on this piece, among the others, is that I did cut away that bottom section. And let me have to change my hoop here because I have a little bitty hoop set, which is not going to let me show this to you guys. So I'm going to drop that out there and put my hoop together correctly. So sorry about that, guys. I have to have a much larger hoop to be able to zoom in on that sucker because it's going to want to center in. Hopefully I can zoom in and see the bottom of that now. Yes, now we can. All right, let's bring me back out of the screen. And there we go. You can see that there are this little element is here with these curved fills making up that belt. So what I did do is in the original art, I cut loose that quatrefoil that is on the bottom of the other one. And we can see that here in the Pope John shield. We'll just go ahead and Pope John Paul shield. It is down here. That quatrefoil that's down here gets cut away. And I did that in the original digitizing file. And we actually just took away some of those decorative elements so that we could add the belt later. The other things you're going to see is what they called a Moor's head, which is very kind of politically charged at the time that was on his piece. We have the bear here, and then we have the seashell. You can see lots of use of those curved fills. As you can see, I actually used the applique tool to add back in these preview fabrics for you. So those preview fabrics are not necessarily representative of the final piece, but I used the Embrilliance applique preview on some outlines just to make it where we could see those background colors as we were running. You can see this is the actual stitching, and only that red is there as cover stitch. But let's go ahead and run this. But what I really want to show you is the central elements that are here to it. So first thing you're going to see, and maybe I'll go ahead and actually take those out. I think we still see what we're doing. First thing you're going to see is that we actually have placement and simple tack down lines to put down both of these panels at the same time. So the first thing that happens is both of these applique panels go down at the same time. They are adhesive backed. It is a pressure sensitive, so it's like a big sticker. That's the stuff that I was using. And then we have a tack down, and we go ahead and put the red coverage in first because I want that to be under everything and to hold everything down. Then we're going to go ahead and tack down both of the other edges in one go, the same way that I would do the other piece that you saw earlier. So we tacked down the central area first, and then we went back and tacked down the outer area. And then everything else runs as you would see from the original piece. So there's all the backgrounds and stuff. I don't know that we need to run the belt. I can run that back for you in a minute. But the other central elements are last in this piece, which is not usually what I would do, but in this case, I added them last. We do have on top of that fabric just 3 very simple fills with a nice curved fill for that shell. So I made this fill elements. I didn't carve these out because they really are graphical. They're supposed to be pretty flat, and I thought the shell looked very nice just with that curved fill in it. But you'll see the bear does have, the limbs are carved separately. We have auto split or length limited satins here in the legs. So we have satin-like legs, but they have a little bit of texture. And the bear's body has nice curved fills as well. And the haunch is done last on top. And then we have a little bottom edge done, and then the flap of that kind of saddle that's on his back, and then the detail is done on top of that. You also see that the neck and the head over here on the left are done separately, and then the hair, and then the crown on top of that. The crown in separate elements, where each of these elements is carved in order to make it a little more detailed, a little more interesting. We zoom in on that, and you'll see that what we have are multiple satin stitches with different satin stitch angles. So we do have that same kind of overlapping like you saw like you would see in that acanthus work that's on the side. Also, again, length limit or auto split satins being used on the very wide satin stitches. And in general, I do a lot of that carving and layering. So that's just something that you'll see in a lot of my work is the carving and layering is done so that we have anything that is adjacent to each other will have some differences in texture and angle in order to get a little bit of different color and reflection out of the light. And so that's how I tend to break up big slabs of color so they look a little more interesting. Though I will fully admit that in the shell down here, I just decided that the shell as an element was nice with the curved fill, and I didn't feel the need to separately carve those out in the shell. I think it looks a little too bumpy, a little too rough. Just so we can see it, I'll show you that once again, the run through of that belt, not something that is all that, particularly interesting aside from maybe the way that those crosses are put together. So let me see if I can get the belt here, because that was done pretty early. Underneath the rest of the pieces, you'll see curved fills being used for both sides of the belt with a central flat fill, curved fill into the bottom of the belt, and then the borders on the bottom of the belt and each of those cross sets. And you'll see the cross sets are done with opposing satin stitches. So interesting stuff for some texture there, just to see that. Let's see. I think we also, if I'm correct, let me grab my window here. We should also have the Francis shield here. Yes, we do. We have it was the Benedict shield I was talking about before. The Benedict shield is the red and yellow. The Francis shield is this last one. Interesting things on the Franciscan shield here is that we do have this star here. And this particular star, this 8-pointed star, is done with 8 overlapped satins. And you'll see interesting things to notice about that is that we have this tapered end. We cut the end off at a chisel point and turn the satin stitches. It lets us get smaller than we might otherwise get. And we have our outlines go out beyond it. And what we end up doing is filling up to that point. And then that little empty point there is filled in by push. And the narrowing of the satin stitch makes it actually line up pretty nicely. It doesn't look too bad. And then we also have individual carved in this kind of cone flower that's here. We have individual carved satins that layer into the coned flower to make it interesting. Other thing to notice in here is that the rays on the sun are done in satin stitch elements that are kind of radially placed around. Um, and you can see a compensated kind of oval shaped fill here that becomes circular when you run it. So those are the things that are interesting there. Let's go ahead and just kind of run through these pieces. I don't know what order they're in, I'll be honest with you. Let me see which direction that we go with these elements here. Okay, the sun runs first. Oh, and this is not my final piece because that is not jumped like that in the final. I opened up a working file, an illustration file. Okay. So I apologize for that. That sequence is total junk. That is my working sequence where I was copying pairs. And in fact, the good thing this does show you, I'll go ahead and take the L on that because I showed you the wrong version. What you do see here, though, is I make one set of opposed sets on these points, and then I copy and paste them and rotate them by angles. And that means that as I go through, because I've made a set of opposed sets, it rotates and it maintains the center. And then I resequence these elements after the fact. So it is something, it actually still shows an interesting drawing technique. When I start, I make the first pair and then I rotate them on an angle and it keeps the center point right where it's supposed to be in the center of the design. So actually, it does show you how I did some of the drawing where I copied and pasted all these elements. And the same thing here, I make one pair of the two little wiggly pieces. Then I divide the circle by I divide 360 degrees by the number of pairs I have, and I rotate those around in order to create all of my copies. So there's that. Though I did have to show you a goof because I showed you the one that was done before I resequenced my final elements there. Those jumps are not in the final piece, I swear. But let's go ahead and go down to our other two elements that are interesting there. We saw how those rays were made. Let's go to my little 8-pointed star that's down there and to the flower. Hopefully those are all finished sequencing and post-editing so I don't have to embarrass myself again. But let's go down to it. Down at the end here, we have our star. That's actually sequenced correctly. We see that I build that up from one side to the other and then finish out on the far end. And then we can see that there's traveling and I build up the little individual kind of petals on that cone flower as these big satin stitches that overlap to the center and then go out to that top piece, the closest element to us, and then outline them after the fact. So there's that. Even if I showed you one that was one of the incomplete pieces, it looks like I must have gotten I probably have a version 4 instead of a version 3, and I opened up version 3. So do pardon me on that one. Even when you try, sometimes you show people the bad stuff. Anyway, it's sometimes fun. Cloud Nim says, okay, I tilt my rung sometimes when I get a small point in satin. Wasn't sure if a weird thing to do or not. No, ending on a chisel like that is great, especially just make sure you stop early, especially if you have those outlines. You want to stop early when you tilt down to that tiny spot, and then make sure you have room for push compensations. We know that anytime we have like a vertical column, it's going to push toward the open ends of the satin stitch and narrow toward, in the length of the angle, the stitch angle. It's going to narrow in that. It's going to push the opposite direction. So as long as you stop early, super, super great. Lisa says, yep, bonus Easter egg technique. Yeah, me showing you one of my drawing techniques. It's also something I do in vector. Whenever you're trying to make rays around a circular centerpiece, or you just want elements that are offset from a circular centerpiece, make your first copy, then flip it, move it to the bottom of that same circle, make sure that it is the right distance apart, then copy that pair and rotate it around that circle by degrees until you get all the different elements you want, then resequence them into the actual pattern. That is just something that I've always done. From the great state of New Mexico that I currently reside in, that I was born in, we do lots of Zia symbols. And so you learn to put rays off of a circle very early in your drawing and digitizing techniques. Barbara says, hi, found you from Gresham, Oregon. Hey, Barbara, thank you for being here. And yes, cloud nibs, that is what I generally do. I do turn those things. I will say this. There is a limit to how much you can turn your rungs of the ladder or your inclination angles. If you keep turning them flatter and flatter, you'll see that the outside edge of that satin stitch is going to get loose and look kind of jagged. So do just kind of balance it. You have to balance it between how much you want to turn into that small point, how small you're getting, and how much roughness you have on the outside edge. But yeah, kind of cool stuff. Anyway, Let's go through the last piece here. I guess, oh, that's the last piece there. I'll tell you the one other piece that we were going to talk about from that original set of religious stuff, and then I'll kind of run through the Easter egg design quickly and get done here because I did not intend to go this long whatsoever. But yeah, we went through that piece, and you can actually, let's go ahead and look at the actual design as stitched out one more time just for the heck of it. Here is the actual piece as stitched out, and we can see the rays here and how the outlines hit. There's a couple little elements of gold that are maybe showing. This is my first sample that was done before we did the final piece. But you can see the other outlines hit, and especially in this guy where you have those chisel tips, we're hitting those outlines pretty good. Got a little bit of wiggle up here where I can see maybe a couple of stitches of yellow that might need a little touch up. And then down here, that flower, those outlines are dead set. They're right on. Everything looks pretty good as far as those elements. And we can see how the different angles kind of help the definition. Though I will say, taking like a flash photo that's not on a very steep angle to the piece, you don't see as much of that. And so DJ Kes says, is the rope carved satins? Yeah. Yeah, the rope is, well, okay, it's not carved satins in that they're individual carving lines on satin. It is carved out of multiple satin objects. I'll bring that back up just for the heck of it because we can. Here are the rope sections here. And as we run the rope sections, you'll see that they are individual elements of satin stitch that are repeated along that course. So I have repeated them along that course and turned them as they were going across. So those are individual blocks of satin that are laid down across that rope. So if that makes enough sense there, they are not like a motif stitch, or it's not a carving line on satin. It is what I call carved, which is individual satin stitches layered. So individual satin blocks to make that rope. Could you probably motif that out? Yes and no. When you do really tight curves, motifs sometimes like to break down. So you could use a motif to make that easier, probably. And I think these are probably loose enough. You could make it happen. It'd be all right. But you might want to go back in and then kind of break it up. And so for me, I actually copy pasted, rotated, and just did it that way. And in fact, I did some editing. I can tell that some of these shapes where it really starts to turn, I probably tweaked some of those lines a little bit, though it is the same ropes from the left to the right. So yeah, so carved satins, it depends on what you mean by carved satins. It is carving in the way that satins are done, but it is overlap satins to make that happen. All right. So let me very briefly show you that other piece with the chasubles, because I think it's kind of interesting how that came to be real quickly and the differences that are being shown there. So let's pop myself back in here. This is the other big piece that we did for him. The only pieces we actually did for this kind of Virgin Mary, piece that he wanted. Let me see if I can go ahead and get you back to where we were. My controls are going a little ape here. I'll let me go ahead and pull these together. These are actually the elements that we did. So we actually have a larger element, and this is a much larger statue than you think it is, by the way. It looks like a little small doll somewhere. It is not quite that small. It's not like a human-sized statue. It's not full scale, but it's larger than you think it is. There is the large element. This is the Carmelite shield. So Carmelite nuns, and then we have these two little small elements on the chasubles, and then we have this larger element that is directly on the fabric of the dress. So we have all of those shields done, but they are actually slightly different. You see them and you think, oh, so you shrink one down and then you run it and that's the end of it. Not exactly. They aren't super different, but they're different enough to make a quick comment on it. So we don't have to do crazy run-throughs of all of it. But I do think it's worthwhile just to kind of show you the two different choices I made on this in order to make that kind of work the way we wanted it to work. So we'll go ahead and start with the Carmelite shields here. I'm going to try and get these where they're right next to each other so I can kind of show you these a little easier than what I've got going here, hopefully. We'll grab the Carmelite shield small and large and get these to where I can show them both to you, hopefully. All right, so we have our large Carmelite shield and our small Carmelite shield, and they're very similar. But here's the thing to notice on these. So here is our large Carmelite shield, and the large version of it, very simple piece, not much different than the stuff you saw already. Like I said, a lot of my work when I'm doing simple overlaps, you're going to find that I break things up. So we do have kind of serif-like break up between the ends of this cross that go out to kind of chisel points. And we have individual pieces broken up here. We also have in these kind of 6-pointed stars, you're going to see that I've run these two layers of them. We've run them in layered satin stitches so that they get that different angle. The angle is kind of rotating around the star, and that they're layered on top of each other. The other thing you're going to notice is if I can quit grabbing the wrong thing, up into the top of this design, you will also see that we have overlapped satins into these finials here, kind of these fleur-de-lis on the crowns, and we actually split each of these top tips of the crown fleur-de-lis into two pieces. So let me go ahead and once again give myself the larger hoop real quick. Sorry about that. That way I can zoom in at my leisure. When I accidentally set small hoops, it can cause me some issues for zooming in. So let's go ahead and we can zoom back into these real tight. And you can actually see that we have each of the sides of the top tip of this fleur-de-lis here are laid out with an individual satin so that each side kind of has a different reflection, and that this kind of stem that curves down into the crown, we both have a little satin stitch element here, and then we have a satin under and a satin stem on top in order to make them have more definition to them. So we do have also kind of that length limit satin for this bar in the crossbar, the round portion of the crown. And then we just have these outlines that dip in at the top. I didn't trim those. And we just do a little detail for kind of like jewel work in it. So at the right distance, at viewing distance, we can kind of see what it would look like. Let's go ahead and go through it. Number one, first thing to notice, very simple stuff. These are flat fills. However, the two flat fills are at opposing angles. One kind of top to bottom here. We've got about, variance of 15 degrees off of the zero. So it's about 30 degrees from each other so that they don't blend at the edges. They do overlap, but they don't blend because they're offset in angle. Then we're going to notice our crossbars. Once again, we go up into the crown. We do up into the cross. We do kind of this serif that's at the end, the tip of the cross. We go back out to the edges again, and then we zoom into the center with those satins, and it gives us that cool kind of overlap look in the center, that kind of faceted look. Then we have the star on the bottom, blue stars on the top. No trims in these, of course. Then we have our border, and we start into the crown, and we can see once again kind of that same very foliage-like design, very much like the acanthus, where the central element then gives way to those stems and leaves. So central element, the kind of leaf at the top of the fleur-de-lis in two satins with a split down the center. It's overlapped, not carved. Same thing here. We have the leaflet at the bottom and the stem at the top. And then we go into the borders at the bottom of it as well. So same thing here. Repeated across. Then that final finial. Then the length limit satin. And then the outlined elements that just kind of define the areas where there would be jewel spots, but no jewel spots. It's really kind of small, a little too small for me to want to be running satin, little jewels in there and jumping between them, and honestly not really adding to the look. But then we have the small Carmelite shield. As we can see, it's much smaller. In fact, what we can do, let's go ahead and copy this little friend and bring it over to the large Carmelite shield, and you'll see how much smaller it is. Much smaller little shield, right? But what can we notice about it? It is not an exact copy. We have eliminated the outlines that were drawn on with a straight stitch. It's just not going to be feasible at that size. But we have retained, because these sizes of these satin stitches can be maintained, we retained the satins and the rest of this in the splits. They have increased thickness for pull compensation. They are thicker than the ones that are over here in respect to the rest of the design. And the rest of it is very similar, but we have maintained a slightly thicker aspect to all of those borders and satins because that pull is going to affect them a little more strongly. So when we look at it, it really is quite similar, but a couple of different decisions were made in so much as we did thicken those lines for pull, and we did not add the additional detail work in the straight stitch. And this satin stitch bar is no longer wide enough to require a auto split or a length limit to create a satin-like look without making those stitches too long or loopy. So just some different choices that you make debating on what kind of size you're going to run the piece. We're running a little low on time, but I think I'll just very briefly run you through the last piece, which is our little Easter egg family. And it's the last little Easter egg design. I promised I'd get back off of the more complicated stuff and onto some of the fun stuff too. So we'll talk very briefly about the little Easter egg family design. This is something that I drew quite some time ago, actually for a good friend of mine, Christine Shreve. She was working with a company that was launching new threads, and they wanted me to use a collection of the new threads in these pastels to make something. And so I was like, what the heck, I'll make this piece. And I've used it in marketing materials since then because I drew this myself, and I thought it'd be fun just to go ahead and use it up and use it for different stuff. So this is the little piece that I drew, and which makes me a little misty today because unfortunately, you guys know I lost my mom not too long ago. At least it feels like not too long ago. And these were actually based off of my mom and dad from when I was a kid. My dad is a huge human being, and he had a big bushy mustache. Kind of my whole life wasn't super bushy. It kind of looks like mine if I took the goatee off. But I'm 6'4". My dad is 6'8" in height. So yeah, you can imagine, real big dude. And he had a nice big mustache on him, and I always loved that mustache on dad. So this was my mom and my dad and me as a kid drawn as little Easter eggs. Which yeah, goofy, but that's what it is. So there's my dad with his big mustache. I did a version without the mustache once, but I just love that mustache on him. So that's what that's from. It's anybody who has a different kind of family, I have no problem with that. Recolor it how you want, change it up, take the mustache off the design. That doesn't bother me, but that's where it came from. In any case, these were the original color palettes and the pieces, but I'm going to show you how it's put together for fun. You can see the original preview is here from that very old blog post that I did it for, but I've since remade it in Embroidering and actually recreated it with the original vectors, but with the new pieces that are there. So I actually, when we bring this into Embroidering, the cool thing you're going to see is I used the original vector from that was created in the drawing portion in order to create these pieces. So the family is still there, but each of these fills is actually a native element in Brilliance now. So even though I did this in another piece of software, you can get vector information out of some of the native design files and then recreate all the rest of the information around it. And I did so in Embrilliance because I wanted to have Embrilliance tools to use for some interesting stuff. But we'll just show you how this thing was put together, and there's a couple of things that are interesting about it. Number one, where the colors break, you can see we have slight differences in the curvature, but you're going to say, okay, Eric, you didn't kind of offset all the curves. Yeah, I wasn't too worried about blending. The two colors are very similar to each other, even in the original art. And it was something where if there's a little bit of blending here, I was not too pressed. But what you will see is, in order to get the roundness of the eggs, I did use curved fills to get that roundness. But in the little pink, the mom egg over here, it is curved upward so that I get a different play of light from the dad egg that has the curve downward. So yeah, there's that kind of downward curve. It does in both cases make that design look like it's a little more round. The lines of stitching, the stitch angles will make it look a little more round. Same thing in the kiddo egg here. We have kind of a more upward curve, but you'll see I did offset the curvature in the fill for the mouth so that we didn't see the same curvature between the two. Let's go ahead and show you. The other thing is there's actually some weird layering here. I've done layering in a way I usually don't do in order to preserve color order and not have to do the black more than once. You'll actually see that the teeth run before the mouth and they actually extend under, and I use that fill on top of the satin. I would almost never do that, but I wanted this piece to be fairly efficient for the folks who are running it. Though I did have an addition last minute that was less efficient that I did because I couldn't help but make it work, and I'll show it to you in a moment. The last thing, and this is what I'm talking about, the eye shine, they look like little dots when they actually finally run, but something you will learn about little straight stitches because they pull down with pull distortion as you run. If you make little stars, it makes perfect little round dots at this size with that type of with 40 weight threads. So these little dots that are here, eventually in the final piece, they are dots. They are little stars in the digitizing, and just like you would draw them as a kid, little 5-pointed stars, they pull down at small sizes to make little perfect dots for when you want like eye shine, like specular highlights on eyes or any small little dots like that. Let's go ahead and run through the design quickly so I can let you guys go for the day. You'll see the first element, the curved fill. Tatami, by the way, tatami style or perpendicular style underlay here as well. Different colors then come down on top of that. I have the mom fill. And we have kiddo fill, which I've left the room because I have a big solid fill. I've left room in the center for the mouth because that is a little dense to be filling on fill. Then we have the background elements in the banner, and you can see that the curvature is different on those and the angle is different. Then the frontal element of the banner, once again, making that curved fill do a lot of work. Then we have satin stitch elements kind of floating free for the necklace. We have the teeth done as a nice satin with a lot of reinforcement of underlay to make it stand up tall. Then we have the mouth element, and then all the black is going to run with minimal jumping. Oh, by the way, once again, we have our friend the length limit satin in the mustache to make it look a little rougher, have some texture in it. And then all these borders are layered so that they look like we are building from the background. The dad is all the way in the back, the mom's in the middle, kids in the front. And you'll see that the way that those borders layer, look at where the interface elements are, where the borders layer on top of each other. Those layer up to the front. Same thing here. You'll see that the border that defines the edge of the curl in that banner is behind the borders that define the front, which is also why you see me jumping from the right side back over to the left side. It's because I'm going to define all the background borders first and then the very front border last so that they layer on top of each other and give you real dimension. And we, of course, we have our Happy Easter, which we put on. And that's what was run last. But the reason I actually moved this to last in this final design, originally it was the same color as the border and ran with the border and was connected to it. Reason I did that is because once I realized in Brilliance that I had the opportunity to do so, I realized I can have myself a different kind of setup. I can change this out. I'll hide this text. And because we have the superpower of envelopes and templating that I showed you guys last week, I can now go ahead and in this last little piece, I can unlock these. I can use my Ace fonts and any other fonts inside of that templated area, and I can create whatever I want to and have that text warped because we have complex fluid borders. I can change whatever I want and put it in that final border there and have it really melt to that template very nicely. So that is something I thought was pretty cool. And I decided to go ahead and add that into my final design in Brilliance because we have the power. If you go back to the last episode, you can learn all about the different envelopes and how they work and how they look. So we can have kind of cool different stuff that we can drop in there. And I thought, hey, why not? We have that superpower and brilliance of the graphical stylings and that very vector-like envelope. Make it a template so that you could make whatever you wanted to in this final piece. So with that, folks, I'm going to go ahead and start signing off. Thank you for being here. I was going to go short and I went long. Hey, that's how that always happens with me. Every time I say there's a short episode, it probably isn't. Suffice it to say, though, thank you for hanging along and for seeing what's going on. The last thing I'm going to say is remember when you're looking at designs, whether they're in embroidery physically or you're looking at designs digitally, think about design analysis and what it can bring to your own designs down the road. Start with what can you see immediately? What stitch types are present? What stitch angles are there? How do they interact when two elements are touching each other? And what does that do for the play of light in the design? How does light reflect off of it? What do the textures look like? How does the layering give you depth? What can we conclude from the replay? Go through one of those replays like I just did. Go through your Stitch Simulator and play through designs and see how they're built, how they're put together, and how they're built in a sequence, kind of in time. You're traveling through the time dimension of that design. Go through and see how they're put together. And then how can I use those techniques in my own work? What can I do with those techniques? Oh, maybe this layering is interesting. Maybe this kind of stitching is interesting. Hey, maybe the way that I watched Eric build that radial sun is interesting to save time. Whatever it is, look at what's there in the design that can help you in your own work and analyze things like densities, how far apart stitches are, the length of overlaps, so you can see how far things are overlapped, offsets for outlines, things like that, and see, is there something that I've been struggling with that this design has to teach me? All right. So last comments, folks. Thank you very much for talking about my mom. She was really lovely. So no worries. Be all right. But yeah, glad to see that you guys also understand how it is, but it's still lovely to get to memorialize her a little bit there. But we have a couple questions here, and I'm going to go ahead and cover those. First, Jeffrey says, we really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate that too. We also have this question from Joanne. She says, silly question. Did you resize from the native format on that shield and then delete the black outline or redigitize? In the case of that piece, if I remember correctly, I deleted the black outline, resized, and then used a combination of some reworking of the original native elements and some using satin stitch properties to get it to kind of tame the things that weren't going to work the way I wanted them to. So that one was mostly just resized and then retooled. So I started with the large one and then did the small one in that case because it made more sense to remove detail than to add detail back in. I generally would do that if I was doing that, though they were close enough together that I would do that. Most of the time, if I've got massive differences in detail, I'm not likely to rework a design if there's something massively different. Thank you, Evelyn. Hey, I'm glad to see you out there in Orlando. Lisa says, love watching your design stitch out with your commentary. Holes when necessary. Thanks for taking time on your Good Friday for an education episode. Absolutely. Thank you for being here, guys. And happy Easter to all you folks. Lots of folks asking me other questions here, but I think that's probably all we have to do today. I'm over time by quite a while. But yeah, thank you guys all for being there. Happy Easter to everybody. And you're very welcome for the time spent. Thank you for being here. And if I get to say nothing else, make sure to be kind to yourself this weekend while you're doing stuff. Take the time with your family because you never know when you won't have that time again. I know sometimes it sounds a little morbid, but we are only given the time we're given. We don't know when that time is up. Use those hours you have in the best way you can. And when you do decide to use them for embroidery, be kind to yourself, but experiment. Give yourself the leeway to try some things out. And hey, steal from the best. Find somebody whose designs you like and watch them run. It's not really stealing. We want to foster the next generation of designers. So look at the designs, see how they run, and help those of us who've put our designs out into the world to leave our legacy and make some difference for the people going forward. But go try something out, have some fun, and for no matter what you're doing this weekend, religious, not religious, whatever it is, if you're with your family, take time to be with them and be present and say the things you mean to say when you can. All right, folks, with that, I'm going to go ahead and let you go for the weekend. Hopefully you have a good time trying some techniques out and analyzing some things. And by all means, know that I've messed up more than you think that you ever have. And if you need somebody to forgive you for that, I'll do it. I've often been the patron saint of messed up embroidery. So if you need me to forgive you for bad samples, I'll do that ahead of time, folks. All right. So on a less blasphemous note, have a great weekend. And I can't wait to see you again next week.